would like the opportunity to address the board on any matter not listed on the agenda. Each person addressing the board is asked to limit their comments to a maximum of 3 minutes. Is there anyone that would like to address the board? Hearing none, we'll go on to agenda item number 3, consideration of the June 19, 2019.
Sorry, can I ask a question? We have people coming to present to the board, and they said they're in the building on the way up. Will they be able to present on 712 Moffett? I think
You're there.
it was requested.
Yes,
Okay, so would you like them to present now?
we should proceed with them now, yes.
No. Oh, no? It's not a hearing, so.
Okay.
Yeah, no swearing in necessary.
Hello, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to see me tonight. I'm here on behalf of my daughter Jamie. She's looking to purchase a property in Lake Bluff.
Well, if I may interject, ma'am, if you could state your name for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry, Diane Sickles, and her name is Jamie. So what she is requesting is an ability to have a 6-foot fence, which would sit behind a shrubbery that's lining, I think it's Moffett, and I'm sorry, I don't know the other name. Pardon me? Woodland, okay. And this is to accommodate, she has 2 service dogs in training at this time. They will be working with her on low sugar levels. And because they're Siberian Huskies, they require a running area, and they require a 6-foot fence. So her request is to have the fence, which I brought some samples of, which would sit behind the shrubbery. I think the shrubbery is about 6 foot or a little higher, possibly. So that variance is what she would be required to have in order to purchase the property.
Sure, so if I may. As a little bit of background, there's some materials at the dais that were provided to us a little bit earlier today. This has been a conversation underway for a few days now between the building commissioner, the village administrator, Drew Irvin, and the seller of this property and the interested purchaser of this property, of whom this is her mother. So what we're looking at here on Moffett and Woodland is the property in question. This property is up for sale. The people making this request are an interested party in purchasing it, but because they have no contractual interest in the property, they can't apply for, seek a variation. And also as a practical matter, we understand that they would have to make a decision about purchasing the property before they could proceed through the process. So there's no zoning relief to grant tonight. You can't do that without a public notice, mail to neighbors, et cetera. But they wanted to come forward and discuss this request with the commissioners present, try to get a sense of this group before they would consider an application or a sale.
Which is the house? So, yes.
This central house. Here, there's a plat of survey at the dais, as well as some materials about the service dog. Some samples with the person in question. She's about 5'2". She's standing next to the hedges in question. So that might be a good bit of background to tee this up.
And Glenn, what element of this would require a variance?
Certainly. So there is, this is a corner lot side yard, or a corner lot, I should say, so it has essentially 2 front yards for many of our purposes. So this is treated like a front yard, and this is treated like a front yard. In the front yard, your maximum fence height is going to go to 4 feet. In the side and rear yard, so essentially from here wrapping around the back, you could go to a 6-foot privacy fence. What I'm understanding from a conversation on Friday is that, this area around the back and the side of the house, fenced in at 6 feet, would be inadequate for these dogs, given their activity level. And so they're proposing to take it further up towards the sidewalk here, and then bump it out a bit on this back side as well. And again, I think they've given you a drawing on a scale plata survey that's better than the drawing I did on my
It's in the
legal
packet.
pad. Yeah.
Oh, so.
If I may interject, excuse me, the walkway through the hedge
Oh, here it is.
on Moffett, is it? What she was proposing on doing there, while on the sides would be the 6-foot fence, she was proposing to put a 4-foot gate. So as you view it most of the day, it would be 4 foot. And then when the dogs were in the run, she would close the top part, which would bring it up 6 feet, and then reopen it when they were back out of the yard, so that your view is just a 4-foot gate.
And Glenn, before we go any further, since we're all seeing this for the very first time, are you asking us to give an opinion of how we might vote next month? Is that what you're,
So
Seeking?
I would say a few things. First, I'm not asking for anything. This is a non-agenda item. Anyone from the public can come up and speak about things that are within this body's subject matter, of which a would-be future variation request would be, right? I think the people commenting are just trying to get a sense of how that would be received. Generally, if there are things that would make it more or less acceptable as they consider a real estate transaction. So I know this isn't the most ideal situation to be in. Again, just similar to the next item on the agenda, we try to be accommodating when people want to come in early before an application is contemplated. Certainly in this case, as this is coming together in the last couple days, the materials certainly could be more illustrative, but I think there's been a good faith effort to try to provide you with the information that's available at the time.
And
okay,
I,
but the proposal is to put the 6-foot fence inside the hedge.
Yeah,
The
it's,
hedgerow. Because it
it's-
looks to me from the picture that the hedgerow is all out in the public right-of-way, not inside the property lines as drawn on this drawing we were given, number 1.
Yeah.
Is that, do
We-
you know?
Again, we don't know. There was no,
I
yeah.
I don't know if that hedge is where it's located on that property line, so that, I guess that we would have to find out. And I'm just here, and I appreciate your time, just bringing it to your attention for future consideration. But I don't know if that hedge is on the property line, if it's in 5 feet, or I really don't know.
My understanding it is it's on the property line. Is there approximately an 8-foot setback on that corner property? It would seem that the hedge is on the property line. The home was built by Jeff Lynch and landscaped by Mariani and Dan Horvat, and that they're both very familiar with the property line regulations. That Georgia's survey in front of you, so you may know better.
Yeah, well, it just looks from the survey that the hedge is all out in the, I'm just trying to get a sense of where you're really wanting to put this, because I don't think what you've colored on the drawing matches reality. The parkways over there, I think, are 20 feet wide, and that hedge certainly doesn't look like it's 20, the outside of the hedge doesn't look like it's 20 feet from the road in that picture. And can you clarify why you need a 6-foot fence?
Siberian Husky will jump a fence lower than that. They'll jump it. And it needs to be a solid fence, because if there is like a cyclone fence, they'll climb it. So a Siberian Husky, to be safe, has to be behind a 6-foot fence. Plus, they tend to run. So if you have a Siberian Husky, you need to keep it fenced or pretty much leashed, because they enjoy running, they like to run, and they will run. They will jump a fence. And they're a high-level activity requirement, which is why they need a running area during the day. And
An electric fence wouldn't
no,
work with
sir.
them?
No, they'll go through it.
Are we dealing with one husky or two?
2.
And both of them are service animals?
Both are training to be service dogs, and that's for low sugar levels.
Service dogs for the future owner?
For Jamie, yes.
Because I think you're actually allowed to put the fence also in part of that cleared area, because I don't think the house is built on the front setback line.
Uh-huh.
So you're allowed to have a 6-foot fence out to the required setback. So I'm just trying to get a sense, because I think there's some dimensional errors between or understanding
Okay.
differences between what's pictured there.
The reason why she's asking for the front yard as well as the backyard is that gives them the area to run around the front, gives them a lot more running space than just that 90, whatever it is, 90 feet of the backyard back and forth.
Do you want to put a fence in the front of the house, a 6-foot fence in the front of the house as well?
Yeah, behind the hedges, yes.
Yeah, but that hedge is certainly not 6 feet or 8 feet. The front hedge, I don't think.
Well,
Or unless she's standing in front of it.
She's standing by the,
That's the front?
yes, sir.
Oh, gosh.
It's by
that's
the mailbox. So if you see that mailbox, she was standing, I think the one picture has her standing by the mailbox, just a little bit. I think that's the north of it. And she was thinking the fence behind it, that way it wouldn't really be that visible, from the roadway, or hopefully offensive to the
So-
people viewing it.
So the zoning variation would be to move the fence past the front lot line that we,
I believe we would quantify it not as where the fence is necessarily, but as the height of the fence. So you could build
Because
it
of the
that
4
far
foot.
forward, it would just be the 4 versus 6 feet that's at issue there.
how tall is your daughter?
5'2"?
Boy, this is tough without having the application in front of us.
And we're more than willing to come back. This was just an effort to provide you with the information to see if it's even viable, or to give you time to look at it. Or to simply say, that's not a possibility, which we, won't waste your time and everybody else's time either.
Just a couple other questions that I have. The species of the hedge, does it drop its leaves in the winter?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. And I guess maybe Glenn, as a general proposition, are there any parcels in Lake Bluff that have a fence in the front yard that's greater than 4 feet?
Sure, so, as a general answer, there are, zones in the village where you could build that tall, as of right. So in the estate areas to the north, you can build that tall, so almost all of those could or do. In the R4 district, none come to mind nearby. I know, I believe you discussed one property you saw nearby that has a similar fence to what you were imagining.
That's
but-
what we thought we saw, just, it didn't have a gate on it, but it
Yeah.
looked like it was, and I don't know, I don't have the road, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't either. So we don't recall a fence variation like this being done in certainly some time. Certainly not since I've been with the village. We've talked about it once, again, in the estate area, really more to do with the Bluff regulations. They would have established a fence adjoining the naval base, actually, but nothing like this.
And although you're not a formal petitioner yet, your position is that because of the species of dog, it would not be satisfactory to have the fence limited to the backyard.
No. They need that full runway to have an area that's satisfactory for them to get their energy out.
And in scanning the letter, it looks like they're only talking about one dog in the letter.
I think the trainer is probably referring to Nuka there, and Kabik, the other dog, is being trained with them also. So we could get, Kamik has just started his training. Nuka's been training for almost 2 years with them.
If it's a consideration, the shrubbery was up to 7 feet, the homeowners just cut it down within the last month to 6 feet. So the shrubbery, has been and can be higher in disguising the fence.
Is the shrubbery within zoning rights? I mean, is there any problem with the shrubbery?
I mean, generally speaking, we would say that landscape improvements really of this nature should be constrained to within the property. From time to time, the village has done licensing agreements when significant ones like this, would go beyond the property line. But also, if there are, we'll often partner with homeowners to plant trees in the parkway, for example, so, it's a bit of a gray area.
So that, the hedge itself wouldn't be a problem if this was eventually granted? Nobody would come back to this committee or to the village and say, we don't even like the hedge, now that you're building a fence behind it, and then open up a can of worms that way?
I'd have to look at it in more detail, but I wouldn't think so. I mean, the only place I could see a question would be, and I think there's an adequate curve here without being there in person. We would like to keep this curve at the intersection relatively clear for sightline purposes. And there's a formula for that elsewhere in the code.
Any other comments or questions from the commissioners?
Well, I would request just that when they come back next month, that they do clearly identify where they want the fence, because I think right behind the shrubs is actually out in the right-of-way, even beyond the property line. I believe you're allowed to have a 6-foot fence to the required front yard setback, and I think the house is set back further than the setback. So if you're looking for a run, you're looking essentially for an area for the dogs to run so that they could go completely around the house?
Well,
Because,
there's a driveway off to that side road, whatever the name of that road is. They would not run around that because of that driveway, but to be able to run behind the home, up to the side of the home, and then in front of the home, that area for them to be able to run.
Do you contemplate any impact on the neighbors from the dogs if they were allowed to run around all day, from a noise perspective?
They wouldn't be out all day, but I don't contemplate any issues with them. They have probably 3 times a day that Siberian Huskies talk a lot, and about 3 times a day they are talking to each other. They're usually in the house, and Jamie can quiet them down quickly. They tend not to be too loud outside. They're not barkers. They don't generally bark at passing dogs, that sort of thing. They're pretty friendly dogs. They don't generally bark a lot like that, like they just wouldn't sit and bark a lot. And they're generally, at least one of them or both of them are generally with her.
I guess barring any other comments from the commissioners, we really as a body, especially we're down 2 commissioners tonight, We can't provide you with any sort of definitive guidance one way or the other. I mean, it's enlightening, it's educational from our perspective, and I think we would like to have our village council also explore it. And I think additionally, we'd ask staff to explore where on the lot line could this fence, if it were approved, where would it be located?
Okay.
Because I think there's quite a bit of uncertainty right now as to where that line theoretically is.
Yeah, we went by that survey we had, and I understand that. So we would get whatever information we need to provide you back with what you would need if you would even begin to entertain it. So, on that note, I guess we would need to get another plat of survey and take a look at where the hedges are and what you require for the hedges, and note the fence from that point.
I think that would be a reasonable approach
So-
from our perspective.
Okay, and so on that note, I know you're busy, you have a lot of things to discuss, and I truly appreciate the time you've taken. This is a spur of the moment and a little unusual, so your time is very much appreciated.
Well, thank you very much, and
You.
thank you for bringing the issue to us.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Agenda item number 4 is for us to administer the oath, or agenda item number 3, I should say, consideration of the June 19, 2019 PCZBA regular meeting minutes. Have we had a chance to review those minutes?
Yes.
Any proposed changes or recommended revisions? Hearing none, could we have a motion to approve? Is there a second?
Second?
Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Abstain, as I was not present.
I think it still carries. All right, agenda item number 4, for us to administer an oath to those participating in the public hearing. Anyone who wishes to participate in the public hearing, I would ask that you stand up, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you. Please be seated. Agenda item number 5, a workshop for 917 North Shore Drive. Glenn, if you wanted to provide the panel with a little overview?
Certainly. So, as I mentioned earlier, during public comments, this is another, if you would, preliminary workshop. Before I get into this, I should mention, if you want to look while I'm speaking, there's a slightly updated plan at the dais for you that has some dimensions as far as parking stalls, setbacks, things
It's
of
on
that
this one.
nature. Yeah, that as well. So as a bit of background, this is a preliminary workshop with the owners of, or with the representatives of this property, which is the home of Bernie's Book Bank, among other things. So a very popular nonprofit and attraction in town. Very many people host events there and do charitable events there. And so they have a relatively high parking demand. In my memorandum, I mentioned that we have a lot of special parking requests in this area. Our police department has looked back through their records and thinks it's in the neighborhood of about 30 over the past year, to allow additional parking along the main street there, which is a no parking area, in order to accommodate some of the increased demand that Bernie sees for their events. So for some time, they've been considering parking expansion around the other sides of this property. In this particular case, they're proposing to wrap the existing parking lot around the other two sides, so four-sided parking. They're proposing to add roughly 100 additional spaces as the result of this, with setbacks ranging, I believe, from a little over 10 feet off the property line to back a curb, to, in some places, down to 4 feet. So similar in many ways to our discussion over the last couple months with 101 Waukegan Road. This will again be reviewed by the Architectural Board of Review for the landscape improvements. It will again trigger the requirements of the Watershed Development Ordinance, which will create substantial new stormwater storage on the property. In theory, according to the best engineering we have, enough to capture any additional stormwater produced by these improvements or even by some pre-existing improvements. Yeah, they've provided this drawing, some proposed plantings, and of course, they're here to present to you tonight.
If you could state your name for the record, please.
I'm Katie Bellino with Rossborough Partners.
Okay.
So Glenn actually did a great job of kind of explaining what we've done to this point already. But so the plan that you kind of see in front of you is, like he said, we've created an additional about 103 spaces for Bernie's Book Bank, who are the current tenants, and they believe that this parking is integral to their operations, just because they obviously have a lot of volunteers that kind of come in, a lot of events that are held there, and while we don't want to say 100% that this is going to just solve the issue, but we do think that these 103 spaces is going to greatly alleviate the issue of on-street parking. Now, if they have a huge event, there could be potential for some extra, some on-street parking. We have kind of preliminary met with some different an engineering company and come up with an actual like stormwater quantity that we are, how do I put this? So we know that there's going to be, that we're over the impervious surface with this additional parking. So we know there's going to be additional stormwater that, a stormwater vault needed, and I've kind of outlined that in, as you can see, kind of dotted on the, in the area to the west. That's kind of based on our preliminary calculations. That is the size of the vault that would be needed. So we have kind of, yes, thank you. We've shown that on there. In addition, on the outside of like towards the street, we would propose to put in more of like a stormwater swale with native plantings that would also help with not only the aesthetic, but some of the stormwater management that could sheet off that would be in addition to the stormwater vault. We do also know that with this size parking that things like, oil and grease separator would actually be needed. We've taken that into consideration, and those are things that we're continually talking about with the engineers. So we just kind of wanted to present this to you guys today to see exactly if we're on the right track. What is it that, if there's anything that we haven't thought about that you guys would need from us to help move this project forward so that we can get this parking solved and expanded for Bernie's Book Bank.
Could you explain, because this is a multi-tenant building with actually two different addresses, how much of that larger complete building Bernie's occupies, and is there dedicated parking for the other businesses? What's that current arrangement?
So actually, Gary Swinson, who actually owns the building, is actually present, so I'm going to ask him to kind of speak to that a little bit.
And I own the company that's the 10%.
Correct.
So currently,
Oh, you have to come up here.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
no problem. Currently, the right-hand side, we use all that parking around to where that demising line is. That's not really
For United
for United Services.
The other, okay.
Right.
So right now Bernie's only has everything to the left of the
Right.
dashed line there?
However, there's a caveat to that. We're friends of Bernie's Book Bank, and we've done a ton of things to accommodate. We'll move cars around, we'll put stuff inside. We do all kinds of things to help them with the overflow as we can. If we just do.
Okay, so the dash lines that are on the west side of the building towards the south end, that's all mostly landscape there right now? Are those new parking spaces, or is that a mistake in the drawing? West end of the building, wrong way, down the other corner.
Talking down here,
Move your
George.
arrow to the left. No, not that far. Right, a little
Oh,
further.
those,
There's like 6 parking
Right,
spaces that are
right.
shown. at the southwest
Yes,
corner of the building, but on the
There-
south side,
there are,
they're
like-
not there,
there's a small area of landscaping there.
And is that proposed to be converted to parking also, or to paved surface
Yeah.
that's shown in the drawing?
Yeah,
Okay.
we would like to do that too.
And could you clarify where the swales that you speak of are going?
Yes, I can. So if you kind of scroll out, so basically along the perimeter of the entire, yes, along that entire perimeter, that would be the stormwater swale that we would propose to put in that area, which would obviously, like I said, be native planting, stuff that is specific to stormwater and actually like choosing the right plant material that will actually help clean the stormwater and that sort of thing. So Glenn, I sent you a plant list. I don't know if you shared that with them as well, but.
Yeah, it was in the original packet, so everyone
Okay.
could have a copy.
So, yeah, you guys have that, but that would be what we would, we think would be aesthetically pleasing, but also help with the stormwater.
And what are all the white curvy areas mostly to the west side of the proposed parking area there, between the building and the new parking?
That would be turf, so those would be areas of turf. So up against the building would be like lower foundation plantings, and then we would have swaths of turf so that it's not just all landscaped. And so it's kind of a nice border there. And I know Glenn and I had talked about, and I think Michael had talked about the Knox box location for the fire department, and so we showed that on the plan, and then it was suggested that we add, additional kind of area, hatched area by the handicap parking, so to allow fire department access in that specific area to the Knox box there. So we did accommodate that as well. And then as you can see in the plans, that's Glenn had asked me earlier today, the aisle in between is proposed to be, a two-way aisle, so not just a single aisle for.
And so these are this is the standard dimensions in this district,
Yes.
no smaller, no larger.
So how many times a month would you need all this parking? Since it sounds like it's for events.
Yeah, so I can't say specifically because I don't run the Bernie's Book Bank, but they're looking to increase their level of use of the building. So I don't know the exact numbers, but they'll run 3 shifts of volunteers in a day, and sometimes they'll overlap, and then they'll have events. They have event space in there also. So just based on, observing it, I would say you'd use a lot of that at least once a week on average. I know today there was a little bit of street parking because they had overflow.
Because what's being proposed here would probably more than double their parking availability right now, since the other businesses take up a lot of that parking that's shown on the site plan.
Oh, for sure it would double their parking, yes.
And have they had any discussions about doing this incrementally, or are they all in, or not at all? Is that where they're
Well,
going with this?
As the landlord dealing with the tenants, we're not fully there yet in agreement, but this would be ideal for them.
Okay, and have you received an estimate from the village as to the cost of what the tree impact fees would be? Because there's a lot of mature trees out in front, and the village has some pretty extensive regulations, and every one of those trees would come down, and it's probably a pretty hefty figure, and I would encourage you before you come back next month.
Right.
Because cost drives everything,
Absolutely.
and if that fee is high enough, it
Yeah,
could
it
scare
could.
away the project, is
It could.
what I'm driving at. And if it
Okay.
hasn't been talked about yet, you should drive down on that.
Absolutely.
And then I've been doing all the question and answering, but just one more while I'm talking. I'll have to tell you, I'm not too excited about giving you a variation to go within 4 feet of the of the property line out there, and then building a swale in an area where there could be buried utilities. You know, some of the electric and telephone and all is usually not very deep. It gets very, very complicated when you get into the public right-of-way with private plantings, and then when the village or another utility has to do work in there, these swales look great when the architectural renderings come in, but boy, it's pretty tough to maintain a really long, shallow, narrow swale like that and have it look good.
Okay.
I would, I mean, I love what Bernie's does, but I wish I threw together a sketch here where I know that our study is recommending that we have at least 10-foot setbacks for these parking in this area where you're proposing to go to 4.
Okay,
And I threw together a sketch that would hardly lose any parking spaces at all, and you could comply with that 10-foot setback rule. You shove your walk closer to the building on the other side,
okay,
and you reorient the one north end, but I tell you, I think you could easily implement something like that, and it would look a lot better, and it would widen up the green space in the front.
okay.
And I don't, it's essentially the same project, but I
Right.
reoriented the parking there at the, just as a suggestion. But I am very, very, very leery about voting for something that would allow you to put that parking on a permanent basis, because this is a huge lot, way out to within 4 feet of the property line.
But you guys, you think you would feel better with 10 feet?
With 10 feet,
With 10
because that's
feet,
what,
okay.
that's already been a concept that's been signed off on by previous boards. It hasn't been adopted yet, but it's part of the Waukegan Road Corridor Study to go to a 10-foot setback for parking as long as there's adequate landscaping. But it would, at least the 10 feet would give you the ability to put your vegetation on your side of the property line and not
Not in
get
the-
into
Okay,
this whole public utility conflict thing. So that's my thoughts.
A lot of thoughts.
So Glenn, I was gonna ask before I comment, what is kind of the standard, and I know there's not a standard, there's probably what we have in our ordinance for setback, but just looking at Google Maps, there seems to be several properties that are not 75 feet back. What
Certainly
has
not.
been kind of the precedent? Is it 10 feet that we've, generally speaking, allowed for parking setback?
Sure, so very generally speaking, we're looking at following the changes at the end of last year, you're usually talking 50 feet off Waukegan Road. You're talking by right 15 feet off of interior property lines. And from time to time, there have been variations granted that would take you 10 feet off of, I shouldn't say interior property lines, but interior to the park, front yards and side yards. 15 off that by right, and then there have been variations that would take that to 10, where there have been, of course, extenuating circumstances.
So what is the 75-foot setback? Why is that red dash?
That's for
line?
structures.
Ah, okay, got it, because I was thinking about that from a, how big of a variance the parking would be from there, but it really, we're talking about 4 versus 15, or 4 versus 10 if we look at precedent. And
Well,
then,
I would be hesitant to use the word precedent, as
well,
always.
but it's been done, we've allowed variances in certain circumstances. And then, Member Russell's comments are very, well-informed on the, the functionality of a swale that's 4 feet and just the associated burdens of that too. So, I guess my comment is I'd like Bernie's to be successful. I think they do a great job. It is an industrial, light industrial park. Parking is necessary for that. I think aesthetics, you're working on the aesthetics. So I'm generally in favor of the concept of it, but I do think the stormwater management is the number one piece. And so, yeah, certainly I would like, to consider this 10-foot, and if there's a way to reconfigure to be able to get that I know Member Russell has spent many, many years considering these kind of things with the village, so I do respect your opinion. So I would like to see it at 10, if you could kind of come up with that, but in general, I
Absolutely.
like the concept.
Member Miller?
Across the street from the curve there is the Jaguar building, and they have parking, single row of parking on that side of the street. Do they have the 10-foot setback there, or is it 15? You probably don't know, but,
Not off the top of my head.
because I was thinking if you,
10 is the smallest I've seen of the properties I've looked at in the park.
because if you thought about just a single lane of parking along that, a single, single rather than double lane of parking.
Along this, the stop
Curve
side.
there, a part of it, and then you can double up parking further. I'm losing direction here, probably going southwest. Is that where we're looking at?
North
The
is
right?
left.
North
So
is le- Yeah, so southwest would be.
that is,
Well, this area down here, I can understand.
So a single row on the one side?
Yes. rather
We,
than a double.
we did experiment with a couple of different options, and our main goal is obviously to get the most amount of parking that we can in this area, just to accommodate the need. And so while we came up with several different options, we wanted to present you guys with this one because it did allow for the most amount of parking. Now, we can absolutely show you the other ones in the next meeting and make sure that we have that 10-foot setback. But just, from a standpoint of, if we're gonna do this project, we want the most amount of parking so that we alleviate that on-street parking that happens 30 times a year, plus. And so that's kind of why we wanted to show you the maximum that we could fit possibly on the site. I'm absolutely open to showing different options.
Well, most of Bernie's events are, well, possibly the evening, but certainly on weekends. The big events, I would think, are mostly on the weekends or Friday night to
Actually,
to
there's a
Sunday.
lot of, so events, yes, but there's a lot of days when there's a lot of parking. Like, AbbVie's a big supporter, and AbbVie had a week recently where every day there was people there and they were
I see.
overflowing. And that's during the middle of the day.
So my concern is with George is the trees. I mean, that's a beautiful property when you turn the
Right.
corner there.
As you turn the corner.
And you're gonna be losing an awful lot of mature trees, which I agree. You better check with the village and see what that
Well,
is
there's at
gonna
least two
cost.
that are half dead.
They are? Isn't
There
There's an
are.
old oak tree.
There's a couple in
that's-
bad shape, yeah.
Mhm. All right, well,
I know we talked about, the tree impact in terms of cost, but would there be something that, obviously, we're probably not gonna be able to get inch for inch, but is there something that we could do in that sense to be able to maybe make up for some of that? Because I know we would have a lot of islands within this area, so we could potentially put in, 4-inch caliper trees to kind of make up some of that tree loss, the caliper inches lost. Would that be something that the board would consider?
I think
Yeah, that's part of the ordinance.
Okay.
If
Yeah,
you,
we can make
if you take down 200 inches of certain types of trees, there's a calculation of their value, and then you can
Absolutely,
have,
based on
you can have
species and-
deducts for what you're proposing to put back in. But I just wanted to alert you that it could be potentially a fairly large number, and
Absolutely.
it can be frightening to some people, and you don't want to go through all this work and then not
For sure.
have that come up when you apply for a building permit and then pull the whole project. It's,
And I think one of the other concerns is making sure that you have a very aggressive landscape plan,
Mhm.
because I think that's critical, especially to the north side of the parcel, but along the entire parcel, just to offset that visual
Right.
of the impervious surface area. But I think a number of excellent points raised by the commissioners. Any other comments by the commissioners or by the prospective petitioner?
One question I just have for the next meeting, would you guys want me to have more of a fleshed out landscape plan for us to kind of review? Obviously I can do that, just in terms of, I guess, what, I want to make sure that I know exactly what you guys are expecting from me for the next meeting. So I don't know if it'll be more of like a workshop. I think we're probably moving forward here, but obviously for the actual submittal, I'll have full plans and all of that. But for the next meeting, is there anything aside from what we've just talked about that I would need to add?
No, I mean, really, there's, I wouldn't think there's many, between where you are now and a full plan submission, I don't think there's anywhere in between to really, you really have to worry about the landing, you know, as
Okay.
long as, I'm happy to look at some intermediate drawings when
Cool.
when you're working on that 10-foot setback as we go, but.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item number 6, a public hearing on recreational cannabis regulations. Mr. Cole, if you could provide the panel with an overview, please.
Certainly. Well, let me first say, with all respect to all of our petitioners, I always love about this committee that we can go from issues from a girl and her dog to a book bank to an issue of national importance in the span of 1 hour. It always makes me think a little bit about the role of local government. So just wanted to share that. So tonight, the ordinance in question, as you know, earlier this year, Governor Pritzker signed an act essentially legalizing recreational marijuana within the state of Illinois. That has certain implications for us as a local government that we need to address, one of which is the zoning or prohibition specifically, perhaps, of marijuana businesses. Before we get into what's actually before you, this is a very big, complicated act. I want to be very clear about what the act allows us to do as a village and what we're here to talk about tonight. Because on most of the big things, we have no discretion as a village, regardless of our home rule authority. So for example, we must allow people to possess recreational marijuana. We do not have a choice about prohibiting it. We don't have a choice about ticketing people for it. That authority has been removed from us as of January 1st, 2020. Same with consuming it in private residences and private places. Same with having to allow people that hold medical marijuana cards to grow up to 5 plants in their homes. We must allow it. We don't have a choice. There are a few things that the state act will continue to prohibit. It won't allow consumption in public places, generally speaking, so anywhere you couldn't light up a smoke, generally speaking, you won't be able to consume marijuana. Minors won't be able to have it. You won't be able to have it near a school. You won't be able to have it in the presence of minors. And then finally, there will be no home delivery, anything like that under the state, the laws the state has passed. In the world of the village's discretion, it's really one big pillar, which is we can't control possession, we can't control use, but we can control where these businesses that serve that clientele establish. So the act gives us the power to ban them outright. As we'll talk about in a bit, the village board has suggested that approach. If it's not banned, you can look at zoning controls the same as other types of businesses. If it's not banned, or even if it is banned, whatever, you can look at taxation. And also, as a slight exception to the public consumption rule, the village does have the home rule authority in some cases to allow for on-premises consumption in businesses presumably made for that purpose. So if you were to have a cafe or something, perhaps you could be in that business. And then finally, separate from this body, the legal thinking now is that you could do regulations of home grow by medical card holders. Again, that's more the level of the village board than this body. But what we're really dealing with here is first the threshold question of prohibit completely or don't prohibit completely. And then if you don't want to prohibit it completely or wouldn't recommend that, then we get into what types of businesses in this world, what regulations are put upon them, so on, so on, so on. So that's what's before you here tonight. I don't want to go verbatim through the remainder. I've tried to give an overview of the different types of businesses created in this marketplace by the state legislation. I have to emphasize, it's over a 600-page act. It's a lot to digest and swallow. That's why I'm glad we have a very capable village attorney who reads these things for me, so I don't have to. But we're happy to answer questions as the commission or the public may have, but I'm happy to have a discussion and, of course, to entertain public comment. The one last thing I would note, I think the village attorney wants to chime in too. Member Murray could not be here today. He's traveling on work business. He has transmitted a letter that's shared with you at the dais and was shared in the packet. Additionally, Member Danley was unfortunately stranded as a result of her travel plans earlier today. She has again provided a letter a few hours ago, which is present at the dais on this subject if you'd like to review it. And then finally, no written public comment from a resident, Stephanie Bjork. We did get this newspaper article, I believe, from Steamboat Springs out in Colorado that she wanted to share with the group.
Mr. Schuster.
Thank you. The one thing I just wanted to mention is that kind of what the status is under our current zoning code for recreational cannabis. So as we talk tonight, we're talking about recreational cannabis businesses, not medical dispensaries, which are special uses under your code and are governed by a separate statute that deals exclusively with the medical cannabis use. So under our code, recreational cannabis businesses are not permitted. They are prohibited under our code. And you have in your zoning chapter provisions that say, for each zoning district, no building or lot shall be used within whichever district it is for any purpose except those permitted and special uses identified in the zoning use table. So the default rule is that if there's something that is not, we don't have to say in our code, it's prohibited. If it's not in there, it's prohibited. An oil refinery, nowhere in our code does it say you can't do it. But if somebody wanted to open an oil refinery, well, it's not in the use table as a permitted or special use, it's prohibited. So that leads us to the question of why we're even here and have to do this. So our recommendation to the village is that if you desire to prohibit it, that you make it explicit. So that way there is no ambiguity, no confusion, but also so that nobody can try to argue, well, it is permitted, not, but because it fits within the definition of another use. So for example, in your, you have in your code, food stores. Could somebody sell a recreational cannabis food item and say, oh, this is within a food store, therefore I, have a right to do it. We don't want to have a needless fight. We think our code is pretty clear that it's prohibited, but again, we want to make sure it's explicit, everybody knows the rules. The other issue, and this is one of the reasons that the village board adopted what we called the red flag ordinance, is to put everybody on notice that we're doing this, because the other issue in terms of urgency and kind of question of when do we need to do this, while the act takes effect and licensed recreational cannabis businesses can start selling as of January 1st, we also want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where somebody tries to argue that they have a vested right because they started to invest money and do build-outs and start doing things prior to January 1st that would give them a vested right. So that's one of the reasons we did the red flag ordinance, so that everybody is aware. But also why there is some urgency, I think, for this body to act if you desire to prohibit it, or for that matter, if you desire to and want to recommend allowing it, but adopt certain types of regulations, that you're doing so before somebody would have gone out and started to try to invest and pursue the business. So you are not required necessarily, obviously, to make any decision tonight, though that's your prerogative if you decided to. But also our recommendation would be not to drag this out over month after month after month, saying, oh, it's a January 1st deadline, and waiting till December at the last minute to make it clear. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. But that's what's before you this evening and why we are doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Schuster. Our thought process tonight is to begin with public comment. After public comment is concluded, the commissioners will discuss the issue, and we'll just see where it goes from there. So,
I have a quick question.
sure.
You held up something from Steamboat Springs.
Sure.
What's that all about?
Yeah,
You can just give me a synopsis of it.
yeah, it's just talking about some of the challenges the state of Colorado has had testing drivers for marijuana impairedness.
That's true everywhere.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Is this yours?
Yeah, that's mine.
Oh, sorry. Grab this one.
That's my pile
Oh,
of
it's your
leftover stuff. Nobody sees it. Oh, that's an extra one.
Anybody else would like a copy?
We'll share. Oh, Glenn, you also mentioned Jill Danley's letter, or somebody did.
Yeah, sure,
What was the
again.
content of Jill's comments?
Just the circumstances of her delay,
Oh, okay.
and she said that she shared the sentiments of Jim Murray's letter.
Okay. Jim's in the
His
packet
was
as
included
well.
in the
I'm going to
packet.
allude to it also. I'm Kate Briand. I live at 610 Lincoln Avenue. Good evening. Thanks for giving us a chance to speak to this. My comments have more to do with process and actually reflective a little bit of what Ben just said with regard to the speed with which this is going to transpire. And I think they also have to do a little bit with what Jim Murray alluded to in his letter. I have a problem with the direction that the village board gave you only because it basically quashes public comment. Now, there's probably a reason that the room is mostly empty. It's July 17th. People are on vacation and away, but that's what Mr. Murray alluded to, was that it's somewhat disingenuous to call this a public hearing for public comment on this issue in the depths of summer. And I understand that there's a sense of urgency because of the concern that someone may end up having a vested right. But at the same time, given the controversial nature of this, I would think we would want more conversation, not less. And I think that it's tempting to think everyone thinks that the way the board does, but that may not be the case. And so then what we end up with is a decision that was made without hearing people and giving them a chance to say what they think. Whether they're for or against it, that's fine. It doesn't matter. I have no feeling one way or the other about that. But I would imagine that you would all agree that it's better as an advisory body to have heard what people have to say, or at least give them more than one opportunity before you make a decision, even though you've sort of, forgive me, been told what to do, which can't feel very good. Given the fact that they've ignored this body recently on some substantial issues that face this village, I find it a little ironic that they then come with this. Especially given the comments of Trustee Meyer predicating this on the preemption doctrine, which I think is a thin ice to predicate it on in the event that it becomes allowable under federal law, let's say in the next few years. Then where does that leave us? There has to be some reason to do this beyond that. And if you are against it, then there has to be some evidence as to why. Is it because you're concerned about crime and overtaxing our police department? Or what is it exactly that's going to convince people that it's not a good idea when the ordinance, I believe, allows for a medical marijuana establishment? Isn't that correct? Our ordinance allows for medical dispensary?
It does, again, because the state requires that we do.
Okay, so now the state, regardless of the fact that it's federally prohibited, we know that Colorado has it and that the federal government does not enforce the federal act that makes it illegal. So that's normal because this doesn't have anything to do with the constitutional rights. So normally preemption is used to enforce those rights, not something like this. So my point is that it just seems like we're coming at this with this direction. I don't think if anyone were researching where to open a recreational cannabis dispensary and they looked at the comments of the village board that they'd think, yeah, I'm gonna move ahead in Lake Bluff. This is a red flag to anyone thinking about it. But it turns the process on its head. That's not democratic to do that. That makes what I'm standing here doing a farce. And it shouldn't be like that. We should have multiple meetings on this, give people a chance to write in more than one or two people, and let's see what people have to say, and not turn them into pariahs if they're for it, but give them a chance to speak before the village board clearly puts the cart before the horse. We deserve that as taxpayers, and I think you deserve the opportunity to hear what people have to say. And if you decide to vote against it, that's fine, but at least we all know that you heard us. And that matters to me a lot more, because it's so demoralizing to think that what we have to say and how we feel about an issue this important means nothing because the decision has already been made. That's very troubling. And I hope that you take that to heart as you make your considerations on this issue.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Briand? I'm sorry, I may have been reading when I should have been listening more.
No, that's okay.
Do you have an opinion?
You know, I don't have a strong opinion about it. I do have an opinion about medical marijuana because I've known so many people who have been helped by it. On the recreational side, I've struck a neutral position because I haven't done my research. And so I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I don't have the level of knowledge that other people do on this issue. So I was pleased to see that there are dispensaries, medical marijuana dispensaries are allowed because they have to be. There's one in Highland Park, there's one in Deerfield. We should talk to Highland Park and Deerfield and find out how it's going for them. There's one in Buffalo Grove, there's one in Mundelein. Let's see what they have to say. Let's find out, do our due diligence. That's what we owe ourselves before we make a decision on this. And I'm gonna look into it more. I appreciate the question. But I think when we're dealing with, as Glenn points out, an issue of national importance, we need to sit here and have multiple meetings and find out more because we don't have all the facts. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Peter McGuire, 610 Lincoln Avenue. Kind of tying into a little bit of what Kate spoke about. I've got 40 years in banking. I've been living here for 8 years or so. I've served on various boards, and to me, the planning essence of this board is the most vital thing I can think of in terms of the future of this this village, because we look at the village trustees, they deal with a lot of issues. I look at the zoning issues that you deal with. A lot of those are reactive. You know, things come up before you and you react. The planning side, to me, is the most important part if you're really looking at the next 5 to 10 years of this village. So once again, why did you all decide to do this? Did you do it because you wanted to do the zoning side, or did you really want to spend time on the planning side? The planning side takes work, and it takes investigation, it takes data. The perception, I've been here for 8 years, is that, you know, you've got your caucuses, your village trustees, and it seems to be kind of an inbred group where everybody seems to know each other, taps the guy on the shoulder and says, I'd like you to join, but, you know, I'd like you to follow what I have to say. And that sort of inbred nature, which I notice seems to be happening in this village, I guess I'm calling people out on, because in this issue here, and I read the article, it's like, well, there's a fait accompli. 1 or 2 people say we're not going to do it, so therefore we're not going to do it, and therefore Planning Commission, you've really been told what to do. I'd like to think that's not the case. So even if you were, you know, congenial or whatever, I think there has to be an independence of a planning board that says we are going to at least, we're going to roll up our sleeves and do some work versus just do the bidding of maybe one or two people. The reason why I give this example is I went to the Target meeting and there were very few people and I was shocked. I was like, wait a minute, I just moved here, there's a lot going on here. And I noticed that, well, we're going to do this, and I asked the question, and other people did you do a best use, a highest and best use study? No, we didn't do that. Oh, well then, did you really see what the problems and issues were with other targets around, the nation? Well, no, we didn't really feel that was necessary. But we feel confident that this is the best way forward. Well, what's interesting is that by going to the Planning Commission and then going to the Village Commission, I listened, I observed. What was interesting is we spent all this time on traffic. That seemed to really take everybody's attention. We didn't realize the crime. We didn't do the research. So if you want to talk to your police commissioner, find out the amount of crime that's going on because of Target, and know that we never researched that, we never planned for it, we never discussed it. It all got not shoved under the rug. I'm saying it was never known because we didn't plan, all right? I'm using that as an example. So when we talk about this situation and I see all these yeses, that's up to your local control, I'm asking you to maybe roll up your sleeves. One, what are the financial ramifications of doing it? What are the financial ramifications of not doing it? Everybody complains to everybody about their property taxes, and then we're told at the village meetings, well, we're only responsible for 10% of the expenses, so people should stop complaining. Well, the village trustees, and therefore your outlook, you're really responsible for 100% of our revenue opportunities. Well, if all of a sudden I read this article that says, well, really, we don't want to do it, we're not going to do it, therefore don't do it, then I'm saying to you, and I'm saying to them, well, I'd like, as a voting taxpayer, what are the financial ramifications of this decision? And no one seems to know that because no one wants to do the work. And that's why I'm turning to you saying, are you actually willing to do some work on this to see what the other studies show? Because quite honestly, we should be able to tell our constituents, we decided to vote no, even though we could make such and such because of the following reasons. Or we've decided to vote no because we found this out. I don't see people embracing that idea because sometimes I get the feeling here people don't want to do the work. And so I guess I'm really hoping that you will be willing to do some work on this and then report back to the board and to your constituents. I just think that you need to understand that planning, I've come and talked before, a lot of people talked about, well, we're really zoning. It says planning. Well, to me, what's your plan? Do you have a plan for these 5 areas that are up here? I think as a planning commission, you should have a plan, and it shouldn't be dictated by the village trustees. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay. My name is Jim Arnold. I live at 204 West Scranton, and I'm probably the most informed person on the subject of marijuana you will ever meet in your life. And I have a good reason for that. 5 years ago, my son, who has 2 degrees in finance, said, "Dad, I don't want to work in an office." So where he is now, he's in what is known as the Emerald Triangle, which is Mendocino County, Humboldt County, and Trinity County in Northern California. That is the Garden of Eden for marijuana. They've been growing it there since the 60s. When logging went away up there, this is extremely hilly and mountainous and covered with trees. He went out there 5 years ago. He spent the first year living in a tent on a remote grow site, because everything out there is sun-grown. When you talk about the Midwest, it has to be grown indoors because of our inclement weather all winter. So when he went out there, I hadn't smoked weed in 45 years, so I was completely out of the loop. So I said, I want to find out what my son is up to here and what the state of all this was. So I went online and I signed up for every possible research paper from Johns Hopkins, from Stanford, from NYU, from all over the country. I get stuff on a daily basis from all over the world, including Europe, on this subject, and it's fascinating. What I see for the future of, I'm going to call it weed instead of saying marijuana all the time, is its medicinal aspects. Its ability to kill pain, its ability to relieve symptoms like seizures, Parkinson's, even the stuff my dad died from, Alzheimer's. I've got binders full of research done by the Salk Institute of Biotechnology in La Jolla. I got one today from, you know what JAMA is? The Journal of the American Medical Association. Their pediatrics division, where it dealt with the fallacy that when you legalize, and they looked at Oregon, Washington, California, Colorado, which are the big ones, that there's always been a concern that weed would find its way, into school children, teenagers. It's too late. It's already there. It's been there for 20 years. Anybody who wants weed at that level can get it. So, the argument that we're protecting our children, excuse me, but it's bullshit. They can get it tomorrow if they want it. Now, what the JAMA article said was that youth use of weed goes down in a recreational state for a number of reasons. One of which, I'm not doing something that's cool and against the law. So the social desire to fit in and be cool goes away. And it's harder to get because the black market shrinks. Everything anybody smokes or uses in Illinois right now comes from one of those 4 states, basically. It comes overland, trucks, semis, you name it. It's available to anybody who wants it. Any of you gentlemen could get some tomorrow if you wanted it. That's all black market. It's not regulated. It's not tested for pesticides or herbicides, which exist in a lot of places. In Humboldt County, in addition to the local farmers who are totally organic, you also have Russian and Bulgarian gangs. You have Mexican gangs. They don't give a shit about that. So legalization is the future. We've seen what the war on drugs has done. That's good. I don't hear anything. Same thing with prohibition. Didn't work. Created criminal cartels. So I don't personally care whether we have a dispensary or whatever here, but you need to operate on data and not bullshit emotion. I'm not saying you guys are emotional here, but above you, as Peter is referring to, there's a lot of emotion. I've been a teacher for 40 years. I want to protect the kids. Over. That's a specious argument. The Justice Department has issued an edict that they do not enforce any marijuana stuff in any state that's been legalized. because they know the future is coming. It's here. So, benefits for Lake Bluff? We figured out, you know, you use, like I said, any grow area is gonna have to be indoors, so maybe your industrial park would be a good spot for one, who knows? That's just the grow. You have to have a separate license for a dispensary. But the main benefit I can see for Lake Bluff is probably, we're always short of money. The police pension isn't fully vested. I think it's what, at 50%? Let's make a little money and do it right, do it legally, do it above board, do it clean, but let's do it using actual data. That's really all I got to say, unless you guys have any questions.
Just to clarify, you originally said you had a neutral position, but it sounded like you wrapped up by saying you're in favor.
You know, I'm not in a position to make a decision on this, and if Lake Bluff doesn't get a dispensary or a grow area, I don't really care. None of us are going to be impacted by that. The city would be impacted only in its revenue that would bring in. It doesn't bring, dispensaries don't bring criminals. They push down criminality. Because the rules for a dispensary are like going into a bank. You know, you've got metal detectors and you've got eyes on it, you know, you got digital stuff all over the place. So, you know, I think it would be good just from a monetary point of view, but if you got, you know, if the powers that be don't want to do it because of emotional issues or dogma, and that they have absorbed over the last 50 years, that's too bad. That's not being progressive. That's not seeing the future. And that's what we need to do. Did I answer your question, sir?
I'm still a little personally frustrated that you started your presentation.
I don't really care.
Saying that you've been studying the issue for 40 years and you're.
No, 5 years.
That you're an expert, and yet it sounds like you do not have a definitive opinion. So.
Listen, this is a wave. This is a wave, and it's going to be legal on the federal level. And it's an individual's choice whether he uses it or not. I have basically unlimited access. Do I use it? No, I don't, unless I'm in pain. Then it works like a bomb. But do I care whether it's in Lake Bluff or not? Nah. I think it would benefit Lake Bluff in some way, as long as it's regulated in a coherent, sane manner. Am I doing all right?
Financially?
I think that's what Lake Bluff needs. It's a little financial shot in the arm by this, maybe. Not my decision to make, but that's kind of what I think about that. I'm not passionate about it, though. Did that answer your question?
You're getting there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. All right. Commissioners, it would be appropriate to discuss the issues. Who wants to start?
I'll start, and I, excuse me, I would echo some of the sentiments that have already been shared regarding the process. I found it pretty frustrating and disappointing when the notice came out that we were instructed to advise to prohibit this. It reminded me back of the Airbnb conversation that we had, or not Airbnb, short-term rental. And yeah, I share some of the sentiments. It really puts the public comment and our discussion into a perspective that I don't appreciate. And I also, we have a small crowd today. I would have loved to hear from another 25 people. And perhaps by coming out with that statement that seemed to be almost a done deal, why would the public come out and want to give comment? They already see it as a done deal. So pretty frustrating. And so at a minimum, I would like to continue public comment to next month at the least. Secondly, I agree on such a, well, it's a pretty big deal that although locally we have no analogs other than medical dispensaries, there are plenty of cities and other states that have gone down this path already. And to the extent that we could reach out to public officials in those areas to get even informal data. It could be qualitative. I don't know what access to financial data we have and really putting a full analysis together, but some level of creating some analogs of what the impacts, tax, crime, driving issues that they've had in those areas. And then I'd also like to understand, just get feedback from others as to what the risk would be of growing. I mean, if you did a manufacturing, is the idea that this is just so horribly bad? I mean, I started the brewery some 10 years ago. I don't know how, I mean, we theoretically, we had well, I don't know if the distillery was technically but we make beer, we make alcohol, and we serve it downtown. Would making marijuana be somehow damaging our country, our nation? I mean, then you're kind of getting into determining the ethical nature of everything that we make. What if a company makes some chemical product? Are we going to, not allow that because it theoretically could be seen as bad? So I think alcohol is way potentially more dangerous than this, in my opinion. So I guess I don't share some of the sentiments of pushing this out of the village. And I would like to see if we could reach out to some other, municipalities to get some feedback if possible. I don't know what that process looks like. And then further, I'd like to continue the public hearing for at least one more month to get additional feedback and to the extent necessary, solicit feedback to say this is something that we can discuss. This is something that we can advise. Please come out and share your views.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Mr. Russell.
I'm sure glad I was hiking in Glacier National Park when the village board had the discussion on this, because it sounds like I missed something. I had no idea we were directed to vote a certain way and would take great offense to that. I've never been told to vote a certain way on anything since I've been serving on this board or on the park board committees that I've served on for 4 years. Generally speaking, if someone would suggest that to me, I might vote the other way just to spite them. So I can assure the members in the audience that even if I end up voting in favor of a prohibition, I'm not doing it because I've been told to do that. I find that a little offensive. I'm smart, I have my own opinions on things and can develop my own opinions. But just because I would vote one way or another, and whether or not it's the same way that the majority of the village board would feel, just doesn't make sense to me. When I read Murray's memo that he sent out the other day, that was my first thought, that in the summertime, particularly when no one's around, we shouldn't be rushing into any decision. I don't see any reason to rush into any decision. So I'm certainly in favor of, particularly when there's only 4 of us here tonight, of continuing the public hearing. August is traditionally the month, I think, when most people vacation here in the village, through to September.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Member Miller.
I too agree that this is probably not the proper time to be making a definitive decision about this. In my mind, I think the board did a knee-jerk reaction without taking into account the people of the village's concerns. And I question whether there are any concerns about doing this. As was brought up by Member Burns, we do have a brewery. People drink. I'm not necessarily thinking they're gonna go out and buy marijuana and smoke in their car. They may go home and use it. You can't use it in public consumption, but people go to the brewery and drink, and there certainly is a problem with inebriation and driving. I think we should wait at least until September and get more public opinion. If there's only 3 people who showed up today, with us tentatively doing a negative or a positive vote to ban this substance in the village, I think there's more information that has to be brought out to the village community and brought back to our committee. I'd like to know what the negatives of opening up a marijuana shop or a growing facility in the village is. I personally don't come up with too many. I don't think it should be in maybe the central business district, but I think the L1 district would be a proper place, either a dispensary or a growing facility. I think monetarily it can only help the village. I'm not sure. I would like to get the police input on this. And I'd like to know, can they open up a distillery, excuse me. Can they open up a dispensary across the street in Norwood? Do we have any say in the matter across 176?
If I can jump in there, that might be a good time to provide a little bit of background. So each municipality will set its own rules. The unincorporated area of Lake County will set its own rules as well. They're convening a task force, probably about a month from now will be their first meeting, to create a model ordinance, which is typically their process. They may make recommendations to other jurisdictions, but generally that's been how the county handles issues like this, informing the staff recommendation to the county board. And to some extent, depending on the information this board wants to see, I would encourage you, perhaps. Every community in the state of Illinois is going through this right now. And so certainly, looking to some of these more regional processes may be a better way to get some of these answers.
I agree.
Early to say, but that would be one reaction to some of
I
what
truly
we're
believe we're
hearing.
not doing our due diligence if we come up with any kind of decision today. And I propose we postpone the public meeting and readdress this maybe when are they meeting for the county?
There's a few dates out there right now. Again, about a month from now would probably be their first meeting, and it could be some time before they make a decision.
I would at least wait till September and see what the county comes up with. But if it's gonna be across the street in Knollwood area or Green Oaks area in their industrial park off of Bradley, I'd just as soon have it here and get the revenue from it. So I say we postpone our vote and adjourn this part of the meeting to a future date.
Can I make a comment on something you said?
Yes.
If you would come to the microphone.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I want to relate specifically to getting the police involved. 6 years ago, I had a large indoor paintball facility in North Chicago, right across the street from Great Lakes Naval Training Station. I had 50,000 square feet, and we were quite busy a lot of the time, and we had a lot of police come and play. They liked shooting things as much as I did, without killing them. And so I had a lot of time. There were about a dozen officers from various jurisdictions who would come in and play, and I'd stand around and bullshit with them. And one of the things that came up, because all my staff, who were high school and college kids, they all smoked weed. And so I said, well, to each of them individually, well, how do you view that? And they said, well, it's against the law, but if I had to choose between someone who'd been drinking a lot and someone who smoked weed, I'd take the guy who smoked weed. I said, well, why is that? And he goes, each of them said this in their own way, I'm paraphrasing. They said, well, a guy who smokes weed isn't going to go home and beat his wife or girlfriend. He's not going to beat his kids. He's not going to get in a fist fight with his neighbor. None of that happens when you smoke weed. But when you drink, it happens all the time. And I don't like that. I don't like to have to be involved with that. I said, well, you're a policeman. I said, I know, that's the downside of being a policeman. But as far as the driving thing, that's individual ethics, it seems to me. I don't know how you could possibly keep that under control. A person has to have a sense of what's right and wrong. That applies to drinking also and driving. Anyway, that's what I know, and I think you're right. Talking to our police chief and any other you can get hold of. And maybe the officers, not just the police chief. Anyway, good idea.
I would like to see the chief come and give us, his opinion. I think that's a reasonably good idea. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, my impression is that I haven't done any extensive research with respect to impairment and things like that, is that the number of impaired drivers in Colorado has gone up extensively after they allowed for legalized cannabis or legalized marijuana. I think there have been other adverse medical impacts or societal impacts also, but I guess I'll defer to others to do the research to support that position. I take a little different view than my fellow commissioners on this issue. Cannabis is a Class 1, Schedule I controlled substance under federal law. It is prohibited. The DEA or the DOJ has not yet taken any affirmative action to change that classification.
No, it's been, the Department of Justice has...
Department of Justice has taken the position not to enforce it,
Right.
although
Exactly.
the prior Attorney General had taken a different position and was an advocate for enforcement, so.
And the current one, Bill Barr, supports the Department of Justice. That's his viewpoint on it. Leave it hands off. Now, conceivably in less than 2 years, we'll have another Attorney General. But that changes nothing really, because the force of legalization is coming. That it's a Schedule I drug. If you know your research and you know your chemistry, you know your brain chemicals, it's baloney. And see, here's the thing. All of us here, if you're over the age of 12, have been indoctrinated that this is a dangerous thing. It's not a dangerous thing. Like anything, it needs to be used with care and caution in the right circumstances. But it shouldn't be lumped in with heroin, cocaine, LSD, etc. It's a natural product. Anyway.
So is cocaine.
Well, that's your choice.
Natural opioid. That said, I personally am at a loss as to what the benefit would be to the community were we to allow for a dispensary or a growing facility. I don't see any negative impact on the citizenry if we were to prohibit this particular endeavor. It's going to be available in other communities, there's no doubt about that. It might only be a few miles away. So I'm at a loss as to what the benefit would be other than perhaps some taxation-derived benefits. But that's my view based upon my limited research at present. I'm not sure that a dispensary would be compatible with the values or the ideals of the village. I'm not sure it would be compatible with our general permitted commercial activities. That being said, I think the consensus of the members present today is to continue the public hearing to a future date. And so I'd be willing to entertain a motion, barring any further discussion among the members or by either Mr. Cole or Mr. Schuster.
Motion to extend the public comment period to
It would be a motion to continue the public hearing
continue the public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm not,
to your August 21st meeting.
to the August 21st meeting.
Unless you choose another date, but
I
that's
think
the next
September
meeting.
would probably.
Well,
Typically, that's the date the hearing is reopened, so you would, if you can
So we
just
just skip a
continue it
month,
again.
we'd skip a month then?
You have the prerogative to set it for the August 21st. You could do it at the September meeting. That is
Ah, okay, I
within
didn't know
your
you could,
prerogative, so long as we do a date certain.
okay, I didn't know
um,
you could skip a month, I see.
You're allowed to, as long as you pick a date.
Yeah, then let's go to
Um,
September unless,
There'll be more public comment in August.
well, that's what I wonder.
And
Can we do August and then just push it out, and maybe we get a few folks in August, and then we push it out again to September? I don't know.
I agree with that.
I don't see the harm in it.
When does school start?
August.
August 21st, 22nd? Something in that variety.
I'm pulling it up right now. The 21st, we'll be here at the first day of school.
Everybody should be back in town.
Exactly.
Yeah, but they'll be busy with school. I think bring it in August, and then if we want to extend it to September is reasonable.
Okay, so I'll stick with my original motion.
Is there a
Motion
second?
to,
Go.
to August,
to continue the public hearing until August 21st.
moved as said.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion?
Can I ask you a question? The one thing that I ask for, rather than wait to always hear from people from the crowd, is my request was who is going to do valued research to give to the constituents the financial benefit of this and the negatives, of what is perceived, because you've actually done the research in other towns that have done this. To me, waiting for people to come up to the microphone is not, to me, research, and it's not giving the constituents information. So the thing is, are you actually willing to work on this and do research? That, to me, is the key question, because then maybe we'd be informing each other as we go along. As Mr. Peters said, you gave an opinion, but you said that's based on my limited knowledge. Well, let's be really knowledgeable. That's my request. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Could I have a vote, please?
Well, you can call it by voice if you like.
You can do a voice vote.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Aye.
Okay. All right.
All right.
We're done with that.
Agenda item number 7.
Thank you, gentlemen, for putting up with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming and
Thank you
commenting.
for coming.
We've seen worse.
Discussion regarding zoning use table amendments, L1 district. Mr. Cole, if you want to provide an overview.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So I think perhaps the longest memo I might have written for this group, if not pretty close, but not as complicated as it looks. I think if we focus our conversation around principles, it'll be relatively smooth, or at least how we've got to these recommendations. So as you remember, the last few months, really a theme of 2019 almost, is this evolution of the L1 district. We talked at the start of the year about looking at some use revisions. We pulled away from that. We saw a few more petitions come forward. We started talking about being more proactive again in conjunction with some of the other tasks of this commission. And based on our conversation last month, we've prepared some specific recommendations for you based on some of the policy planks we looked at. So I think we have a chunk here dealing with permitted and special uses in the L1 district, and then we have a couple of the other more general policy planks that I'll talk about as well, but maybe best to go through the principles and then we can come back to any specific questions. So the first principle we heard at your meeting last month was that the L1 district should be at least as permissive as the central business district. from a zoning background, that's very common. An older way of thinking about these things is that, districts were in a spectrum, if you would, going from least restrictive to most restrictive. And so that's one way to think about these things. So we've given you recommendations that essentially say, in any case where the L1 district is more restrictive than the central business district, make it less restrictive, at least to the point of being, as restrictive as that district. And so that accounts for changes to somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 uses. Another thought we would say is if you look at the distinction between the L1 and the L2 district, it's not that big of a difference. There's a few uses that are listed only as special uses in the L2 district. We think, again, bearing in mind that still requires a zoning process, it makes sense to carry those back into the L1 district. So that really deals with these uses accessory to automotive services, body shops, muffler shops, things of that nature. So plank number 2. The third, we would suggest this is where most of your conversation focused tonight perhaps, is the Waukegan Road Corridor Study talked about uses in the L1 district in an overlay district near the road itself. We've just treated that as really applying to the business park, so understand that distinction. But there are some differences between the CBD approach and what the Waukegan Road District recommended, or the study recommended rather. Really the biggest, most salient issue is how to handle some of these eating and entertainment establishments. In the CBD, they would be special uses. The Waukegan Road study recommended that they be permitted uses. They also differ in saying some of these schools should not be permitted uses. And then again, including a whole list of automotive type uses as special uses in the district. I think that's fairly non-controversial based on what I've heard from this group. Next page. We went back through the use table again. There's a few outliers really that are in this commission's last few years of legislative history where there's special uses right now. With the changes you've made based on the CBD, they are more like those permitted uses than the special uses in the district. We'd suggest you reconsider those if you go through with this. Physical fitness facilities, you'll remember that we had an extensive discussion about that. We've proposed a threshold of about 5,000 square feet and have given you some comparisons in the village to look at and where exactly to set that line. I think 5,000 or 10,000 is probably fairly logical. 5,000, again, on the small side. That's all the L1 use discussion. And then these are more complex, but faster to talk about. One, SIC codes. We have some language we would insert in the use table that just says these are advisory. Nothing prevents a business that's classified in a different code from being considered the same thing. And then we have some language around administrative use interpretations. This is essentially saying that when you have a unlisted use, you can say, hey, you can make an application administratively. Hey, this is similar to the permitted uses in this district. This is similar to the special uses in this district. Because it's substantially similar, it should be allowed as an extension of that policy. Common tool throughout the country, in Illinois and Chicagoland, I would particularly draw your attention to subsection F, which is this whole list of standards for use interpretations. This is really the meat of this. So none of this going on in residential districts, none of this going on for permit uses that are already listed, no funny business. And then this whole list of criteria that you may consider in determining if an unlisted use is similar. And then finally, the last 2 pages you saw at your last meeting, this is just some history around special use permits, use table amendments the last few years. So a lot there. I hope that's as high level as I know how to be with the summary. What we're looking for is direction from this group on if you're ready to proceed with having these drafted into an ordinance, and if there's any direction contrary to what we've brought you tonight.
I have one question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Could you go through that administrative again?
Sure.
Administrative use interpretation.
So, a bit more of a walkthrough. Of course, the zoning code involves a great deal of interpretation. That's just intrinsic to the beast. Our goal here is not to make each and every interpretation require written findings and documentation, but to create a tool where certain complex issues, such as uses, have a more formal process to go through. So we envision this as being, the building commissioner receives an application requesting a particular interpretation of the code, maybe setting forward a preferred interpretation and some reasoning, and a big category of those would be use interpretations. So if you have a use that is not listed, but perhaps is similar to the uses in a district, for example, if I came wanting a motorcycle repair shop in a district that allows automobile repair shops, well, you would say, here's my application. I think this is similar to this. Here are some statements dealing with the uses and so on. Now, I guess something I neglected to mention, we did look, at our last meeting, we talked about this idea of the PCZBA having prior notice of having an opportunity to object. We weren't able to find an example of that elsewhere. We think it's legal and proper to do, but we wouldn't necessarily recommend it. We think that a common approach is that you receive notice after the fact at your next meeting. You have a time to react to it, certainly, and be aware of it. But some of our worries in having an objection beforehand, one would be,
I understand that.
Yeah.
But my question would be, so it comes after the fact, and it comes, and we discuss, and it has to be some oddball thing that would come forward that 4 members in this group object to, for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Can we go back and reestablish some kind of control over that, or is it a done deal?
So yes and no. So when you look at it after the fact, Ben, please chime in if you disagree with my understanding here. You could go in, you could recommend a text amendment that makes it explicitly prohibited. The person who has started the use would have a vested right to continue the use in that case. So
So the
you're
answer
kind
is
of
no, you
closing the
can't go
door
back.
Generally speaking, so if somebody already has made the investment and is operating, you can't just tomorrow prohibit it. Now, you can do things like amortize out certain uses. The idea is you don't want it to be like what's called a regulatory taking, where they've invested money, have a use going, and then all of a sudden it's prohibited and they lose their investment.
Yeah, I can understand that.
So like the classic example are billboards, where a lot of cities decide we want to get rid of billboards. They don't just say tomorrow we prohibit billboards on the side of the highway. Rather, they'll say they'll be prohibited in 20 years, or a period of time that would be sufficient for people to get their investment back. And so that's how you amortize out uses. It's rare. Obviously, it's a long-term effect. So you can't, so from a general policy and planning perspective, the most effective planning isn't to say, oh, we no longer want this, we're just going to prohibit it. It doesn't really work. You have to be more prospective and have a mechanism in place to be able to prevent a use that you want prior to it beginning its operation.
Do either of you see any downside for the administrative use without our input?
Well, it comes down to a level of faith of staff and their
Well, I
discretion.
understand that,
and
but in this.
I have faith that staff would use their good judgment, and if it was gray at all, I think they would come to us.
Well, today they would. I just wonder in 10 years from now if they still would. I'm so skeptical about policies being made these days that I just want to bring it up for discussion.
So, I mean, one way that you could build it in a check to the system if you wanted to is once the building commissioner makes a determination, notice is provided to the village board or perhaps to this body, and with so many days, if there's, certain number of commissioners or certain number of village trustees say, not so fast, we want to consider this further, they would have an opportunity then to.
Well, that's what I was thinking of
Yeah,
when I.
so that is possible, and there are, with zoning options, there are some municipalities that do that with things like minor amendments to plan developments and so forth, where it can be administratively approved, but then it's, notice is given or announced, and within so many days, you have the public body can say, wait a minute, we want to study this further, and then they go through the public hearing process. So it's possible, but, again, it's balancing that if the goal is to not have so many regulatory hurdles, it interjects back in a regulatory hurdle. So it just depends, it's a policy decision of what you want to do.
I mean, I kind of like that, but I would keep that holding period to 3 days or
Yeah, I mean,
5 days.
very short, but I
Something
think there
very
should be
short.
some.
You send it out via, I mean, I don't know how legally you could do it, but I would be okay with an email. And if you don't get enough people coming back with a red flag to say, then by default it just goes through. But I'd keep it short, like 3 days. And if you really care about it, you better look at it. I don't know. Again, I don't want to cause legal bureaucracy, but
I mean, these are all policy decisions. Legally, again, this is fair game.
I mean, to your concern.
Right,
But I also trust staff too. So-
Right, I trust staff now, I just don't know if I trust staff when I'm not here. It's just something inside of me
Or more to the point, when Glenn's not here.
going, Glenn's
Yeah.
not here. I would
Don't
say
they do-
5 business days.
But don't they do it today? I mean, isn't this already something that they do? They have to interpret this every day anyway, when someone comes in and they have to decide if it's permitted or special use, right?
Yeah, so.
When I say they, I don't mean to
Yeah.
put you into their category.
No, you're quite all right. I had a whole discussion about pronouns the other day, so, I'm just adapting. Without getting into the weeds, hopefully this makes it a bit clearer. So again, the code involves interpretations day to day.
Yeah.
Most of those are fairly common sense. Some of those test the boundaries of what the code's made for. I mean, just because you can't foresee every possible situation. When it comes to uses, we do have some, our history has been, we interpret uses in the sense of, does this meet the definition of this specifically? So for example,
I gotcha.
B Market, is it a food store or is it a restaurant?
Right.
Well, it's mostly a food store, there's a bit of a restaurant, is it a special use, is it a permitted use, and so you walk through the definitional questions there.
I understand.
This is
It's
sort
just-
of a additional power, which
gotcha.
is what's allowed.
I have an example that's pertinent to today. If this body approves, or if the board approves marijuana being sold in the village, right now, the law states you cannot smoke it or eat it, well, I don't know about eating, but you can't smoke it in a shop where you buy it. I'm not sure how they're gonna enforce the eating part, because it's gonna be, just stick it in your mouth and eat it, but be that as it may, if that law, if the law changes that says now you can smoke it, like they have hookah bars, okay? So somebody's gonna come to the village, the person who has the dispensary, and say, I wanna now open up my shop as a hookah bar. And the administrator in the village, 20 years from now or 10 years from now, says, well, it's an extension of the current law. That's okay. But to me, it may not be okay, because then you're having an impaired driver leave the facility who can harm somebody. So to me, that's where the checks and balances come in, with the odd case, not the routine stuff. And I think five business days is certainly reasonable, or 3 business days if that's the case, but I think 5 business days, to me, makes more sense. But that's what I would approve, I would like to see, just to have that one check and balance on the administration. Because we don't know what's going on.
I'd go with that short period that you two, whether it's 3 or 5 doesn't matter to me. And it doesn't, at that level of delay, it doesn't impact an
Right.
applicant at all. It just doesn't. We just tell staff to make their decision 5 days sooner than they normally would, if they're worried about deciding one way or another.
Yeah.
And if Ben thinks we can do it, we can build that into the code.
Yeah, I mean.
Sounds good to me.
And we're not approving or anything. I'd say, take that consideration, think about the implications of it, and I'm okay with it too. I don't want to create too much additional bureaucracy. And I know you've got lots on your plate, and whoever's going to be sending out these emails and monitor, there's a administrative burden to that piece of it too. So, let us know if anything comes up where you're like, yeah, you need to consider this.
And we have to respond for it to be taken attention. It's not like, you have to say yes for it
Default
to
is-
be
Okay.
objected to. If you don't say anything, it's,
Right, and I guess the question would be, if that's the way, direction you want to go, the next two questions would be, who? Is it the village board? Is it PCZBA members? And if so, how many people? So what you'll see is in codes that allow, like again, the plan development one's a little more common, where it's a minor change, but it goes to the village board, it's, 3 village board members have to, so, or 2 or whatever. So it's not, and partly it's written that way because then you could always have one person who goes, I don't like it, every single time, and
Understood.
hijack the process. So at least there's a concurrence of at least a couple members who say, we want to discuss this further. So those would be the other questions that you may, if you want to go down this path, that you would want to consider as part of rounding out how you'd want to see something drafted.
I don't know.
So my tendency is to just trust staff. So that would be kind of my first. I'm okay with this. I'm a little cautious with just the burden of it and the complexity of it. So I just kind of want to give you my sense. So if there was a motion to say, let's just go with trusting staff, I'd say aye to that. I wouldn't vehemently oppose the review process. I think there's some benefit to it, but the more I think about it, it's I don't want to create one more thing.
Why don't we just bring this up when we have the full board?
Yeah, that's where because it's going to come back anyway.
Right, let's just bring it up when we have the full board.
Yeah.
Certainly of all the things to talk about tonight, bringing you 2 alternatives to this particular clause is a pretty easy one. I think we can provide that for you for discussion.
So one other question I had, I guess that was Elliott's question. It seems, and I think this is, you can just confirm it, but some of the things that are posted in here as special, not permitted, my theory, kind of philosophically, is that it's relating to traffic. Theoretically high traffic items, drive in, drive out, things that where there's traffic studies that may need to, or traffic impact that may need to be done. So you don't want people just going in as of right and building these things without considering the total impact. Is that kind of fair in my assessment, or are there other factors in play?
Yeah, 2 ways I would look at that. So how did they come to be? Yes, I think you're absolutely right. Something I would consider in looking at them is, a corridor takes on very different texture if it's dominated by, drive-throughs and automobile-oriented, main corridor-oriented parking towards the front vibe, if you would, than it does if it's, facade front, parking in the back. People come, they park, they stay a while. This is really a form consideration, and so dealing with it in uses is a little odd. But certainly there are towns that see drive-ins, drive-throughs, fast casual as less desirable, and have taken steps like these to try to replace those with more desirable uses.
Okay. I mean, fair enough for now. I think this is a great step in the right direction, but I think 5 years from now, we may need to review it again, because we may find that the types of businesses that actually make a lot of money and generate revenue are potentially drive-in, that kind of transactional service type thing, not just the warehousey. Who knows? But I think for now, it's good direction.
I will say, again, I have limited perspective. In the couple of years I've been here, to the extent that there have been restaurant conversations out in the L1 district, they've been traditional sit-down restaurants, delicatessens, things of that nature. I don't think we've had a drive-through proposal in that time, and George, you would actually know better than I would. I think the only drive-through facility I've really seen in the village, outside of maybe target is the old bank, PNC Bank, back before its conversion.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna talk about a restaurant, and I was struggling to remember what your example was gonna be.
I don't think so. I mean,
But I think you hit the nail on your head in your response to Dave, all these ones that are unlisted. I think it was more the thought process that the industrial park just wouldn't, if you have all these, a lot of these things have big storage of outside vehicles, and it just doesn't look as nice, there's more paved area, and I think it was more of a form thing, not the traffic loading for people coming in and, you know, visiting an automobile dealership or a used car lot. It was just the fact that they didn't want 200 used cars sitting on these lots
Yeah.
next to a nice office building with great landscaping.
Well, I was actually looking more to the first one, the first sheet, like sheet 1 and 2, where it was like a drive-up bank, you know, where you'd be able to get an drive-up ATM type of thing, or drive-ins accessories to retail trades, drive-in accessory to service uses listed, you know, those are all special use. So anything with drive-in type stuff. Well, I wonder about dance school, studios, and halls. That seems like it should be permitted. But anyway, in general, I think this is good. I'd proceed. I'm in favor of proceeding.
You don't have any hotels listed as a use.
I'd have to check. I don't think there's a difference between CBD and L1 on that, because I believe it's a special use in all districts, but we can confirm that real
I don't
quick.
see anything here about it.
I would think that'd be a special in any case.
I believe
Pretty
that
sure
dates
it's
back
already
to the-
listed as in our, existing list as a special use.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think that dates,
this is just.
that's just the
These-
changes.
the new-
Oh, okay,
these
then
are
forget
the-
about it. I was just curious. That's fine.
I think that dates back to the Harrison.
So we're not allowed to have another post office in the L1?
That was kind of interesting. Something I should say in passing that maybe helps this make sense is not only, you know, are these very narrow categories taken from tables and so on, but these used to be in very disparate places, and they were put into one table when we codified them a few years back. And so, for example, in L2, it says that commercial developments are only prohibited within the back or on sites greater than 2 acres. And so in the table, it says commercial developments aren't permitted anywhere but in L2, and it's absurd, right? It's just an artifact of how these things have been pulled together over the years.
So Glenn, just so I am not misinterpreting something on the big table on page 7,
Yeah.
the last column there in L1 after that, all these uses that are listed here, that all received some sort of approval of one form or another, you're saying that that particular use identified is now either permitted or a special use across the whole district as listed in this right-hand column?
I think I'm understanding your question, but let me,
Just take an example,
yeah.
the liquor stores, halfway down,
Yeah.
out on the right-hand column, it says special. So
Gotcha, yeah.
you're
So-
saying that applies to the whole district, right? That's the regulation as it exists right now, for the whole district.
After your change, yeah, so I don't think there's any double dips here, but yeah, that's applicable to the whole district. So all we did here is this is the use category, the zoning applicable in the central business district, what it was in L1 when the request came, and then what it was in L1 after this board recommended action, after the village board took action. The real thing I take away from this chart is just that I think the changes you're looking at involving the central district uses carrying over, I think those are good changes. They're recommended by our planning studies. But important to note that a lot of the action you're having to take for new businesses is just by uses that aren't contemplated in the code at all. And so that's why we put some planks out there to try to make sure we had a way to deal with those, where the legislative intent is clear and the text is not as comprehensive as it could be.
So you have a linen supply company in L1 already, the Carousel Linens?
Yeah, so these, at the top of page 4, these 3 uses in particular It was just, we looked at what would be newly permitted if you carried over what's
there it is, I
permitted
see.
in the CBD, yeah. And so all we
That
said
would be
was,
changed to permitted.
yeah, so those uses already established in the district as special uses, we would suggest that they are more like the permitted uses if you make the changes shown on pages 1, 2, and 3.
Also, I think, personally speaking, I don't know what the other members feel, I think gym fitness facility of 10,000 square feet should be the guidance, since we already have an 8,000 square foot facility. I think making 10,000, whether it comes back to us or not. Really, I think the only thing we want to prevent is like a physical
LA
fitness
Fitness.
club, yeah,
Yeah.
to come in without our approval, but 10,000 square feet is not big enough to really hurt anybody as far as a personal fitness. I think 5,000 is not gonna, we'll be seeing more physical fitness then.
I don't have a problem with going to 10,000. I had I had a question mark next to that limit level. Thinking the same thing, 100 by 100 is out in the industrial park lots is still a little postage stamp on most of those lots. So,
I'm okay with it too.
With that in mind, a question I would ask the group then is, would you want to carry the same threshold over to the central business district? That would essentially be most, perhaps all tenant spaces in the district,
The 10,000?
the 10,000, or
Floatstone,
whole district.
the Floatstone, is that 10,000 square feet? And how'd that get
Take a
approved
look.
without us? Just out of curiosity. Somebody asked me that question.
I'd have to look back at the history. I think I had gotten to the village after the decision was made, but before they had finished out the space.
Sounds like that had some inside help on that.
that wouldn't be 10,000.
That
There's
was
not-
Nowhere.
That can't be 10,000.
So I think in the central business, I think
I mean, the
10,000
brewery's probably the
The brewery-
biggest space in the district.
Yeah, it's less than 3. I think the upstairs is only 1,700, and then the downstairs is like another 900
Yeah.
with storage.
I think 10,000 in the central business is big,
That's too
That's
big,
pretty
yeah, yeah,
big.
yeah.
so I wouldn't approve that. I think in the L1 district, yes.
Okay.
But do we have to put a limit in for the CBD then?
I mean, you can essentially you're essentially making a third tier in the code. It's just, would you want to keep those consistent? Would you want to move the CBD number around? Or are you comfortable with that? 500's really just some of the smaller office spaces there.
How big is the one fitness facility by the brewery? How big is that space?
Well, it should be approximately the same.
So I
mean,
think
it's
maybe make 2,000 square feet in the CBD, so you don't have to take over multiple
It's about
offices.
1,200.
Oh, it's only 1,200.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't see the 10,000 in the CBD.
Yeah, I don't
That's
either.
way too big.
Yeah, I agree.
What would the square footage be on the former bank property?
That's a good question. I believe in the neighborhood of 4,000, but we can confirm that real quick.
Make that into a health club. Like, nobody can object to that.
Be cool.
There's parking and everything.
It'll be just 1 second.
You can put a sauna in the vault. That's not a bad idea.
3,700 square feet.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Well, I just had a couple questions about a few of them, mainly to recommend that we get less restrictive on a couple of them, but one went the other way. Given the fact that the ABR looks at any type of outside improvements, I didn't really understand if someone came in and wanted to put a freestanding automatic teller machine, why we would want to send them through 3 boards for a freestanding machine. You get the ABR and the village board. My own personal vote would be that we allow that to be permitted. That's my own thoughts on that one.
What page you looking at?
This would be on page 2 of 8. Near the top, right now it's listed as a special, proposed to be a special. Just given the thought that there are 2 other boards and the low impact of a freestanding machine, if the ABR feels that it's in the appropriate location and the village board does also, that's 14 people that are looking at it in the spirit of trying to open thing, but anyway, I'm just tossing that out. If you
That's
guys
where
don't
banks are
agree,
going
it
now,
doesn't,
anyway.
I'm fine, yeah.
I should note on that note, George, just for this group's reference, so the ABR has been working on some site plan changes to propose. Those would come here and then go to the village board, but those actually contemplate fewer eyes on some of those types of things as well. So we're not talking about very substantial changes. And essentially, their proposal to the village board is that the ABR approve those directly, the same as this group does for variations underneath a certain size. Just to mention that since you
Okay.
use it as an illustration.
and then the 1/3 of the next special one down, or two down, the membership sports and rec clubs.
Let's just look at that.
Someone had an completely indoor facility, would we really care? Someone wanted to build a 4-court racquetball facility?
Isn't that where the under 10,000 square feet fit in?
Well,
No.
right now, the way it's listed, anything that would be classified as a membership sports and rec club would be a special use permit.
And that's how it is today in the central business district.
That's probably more of a concern with the parking, I would say,
Yeah.
in the CBD as opposed to out in the L1.
Would that fall under the 10,000 square foot in L1 then, without having to have a special use?
You can add, we can make it like that if you like.
I was just suggesting if it was an indoor facility, that it wouldn't have no more impact than all these other permitted uses out there, so I'm just tossing it out.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I guess my response, I haven't been there to know, but at least in the case of the racket club, I think you could, depending on something very small, you could make an argument as to whether it's a membership sports and recreation club or physical fitness facility. So I wonder, really, it almost fits more into the sports and rec club. And so it's interesting to me that it's a very fine distinction in operations, but that could be the switch between a permitted and a special use, you know? That would be my question to you.
That's why we're gonna let staff make those initial interpretations.
Okay, lovely.
And then one actually going the other way, where is it now? On page 4 at the top, carpet and upholstery
I was
cleaning.
looking at that one.
And the thing that concerns me about that is if a really large operation were to propose to move into town, I'm more worried with the chemical, air quality issues that could be coming in and right next to a place that we've given a permit for a daycare facility out there.
I was looking at that
I
as
would
well.
vote to push that one back into special use permits so that they could be checked.
Good idea.
All right.
Can we get rid of the videotape rental?
Yeah, is that ever coming back?
Yeah.
At a day,
Is there
a day not that long in the future, I think there will be some improvements to this table by destruction. But we'll
I think the,
leave that for another day.
I think
That's
the
all I had.
automatic teller machine's gonna go away in 5-10 years too.
Yeah.
There won't be cash around, or much.
Videotape rental, though, has historical significance.
It's true.
Well, LPs are coming back, so you never know.
Cyclical.
Any further discussion or next steps, Glenn?
I guess the one thing we are looking for some specific direction on, the middle of page 3. Breweries and brew pubs, bowling, eating places and drinking places. Those would be a question for us as far as, would you want to see them treated in the way the CBD does, or do you want to see them treated in the way that the Waukegan Road Corridor Study proposes? Based on our prior practice, I think you would leave drive-ins or drive-throughs on the special side. We can talk about that too. But eating places, drinking places, and some of these entertainment type uses, we could use some specific direction on that, given that there's a conflict in these principles.
I personally don't have a problem with special use for that, for the drinking establishments and drive-ins, basically for traffic and so forth. And whether it's appropriate, maybe it'll be next to Lake Forest Pediatrics. You know, they put a restaurant there with a bar. I just think that's something.
Sounds like good for business.
It'll be good for, but maybe they find a different location within the.
Terrible parent.
Yeah, I think I'd prefer to keep a little bit of additional control.
I would suggest then and this is relevant to a recent inquiry, just eating places without any drinking involved is probably the closest to the line there of that list we would ask you about.
But I think we already permit that. I don't think that's a problem.
I don't think we do.
I think
It is
drinking is something that should be special use.
Just a restaurant right now that is
Special use.
I believe it's special use.
Yeah.
And actually, it's only newly becoming a special use right now. It's not even listed in the L1 district.
Yeah, I would permit eating without drinking. Well, drinking being alcoholic beverages, of course. But I would leave the others special use.
Okay.
That's my take.
Guess my only concern is traffic impact. Because it seems like the L1's getting busier and busier, at least I see it at rush hour in the evening. But that would be my only concern. Or should we revisit that in August when we have all 6 of us?
At the end of the day, we can bring it to you with a P or with an S, and it rarely isn't as easy as changing one letter.
Yeah, as long as there's no drive-through or drive-in, I don't see that being as big a problem. I think with a drive-through, yes, for sure, but not. There has to be parking allowed, you know, we have certain limits on the amount of park, or this regulation, how much parking you have for a space, right? That's built into the code.
Can you rephrase the question a little bit for me?
I mean, if you have a building, you have to have a certain number of parking.
Yes, yeah, that's built into the code.
Yeah, so I don't see where that would be necessarily a problem for a non-drive-through drinking facility. But we can, you know, we'll bring it up.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, we have so many places where you can go, spend a half an hour, and leave. Why not be an eating place? I mean, I think of Pasquesi, fitness places, you go and you do a half an hour workout, you leave. It's no different than going and sitting down and having a burger or something. That's not drive-through. You're gonna go, you're gonna park, you're gonna eat, and you're gonna leave. So we have a lot of that stuff. I mean, it'd be great if we got just big manufacturing facilities that had 10 people working for them and a bunch of machines. That would be, but in the absence of that, you know, little traffic shows vitality to some extent.
I don't have any strong feeling.
Okay. I think we'll work with that.
All right. Thank you, Glenn.
You're welcome.
Staff report.
Sure, I know it's a later hour than we've been at in some time. We'll keep this brief. The first, as I mentioned, with, this task force model used by our friends in Lake County, they recently completed that for a revision of their solar ordinance. This really isn't directed at us. This is mostly directed at utility scale stuff going on in the unincorporated area further to the west, where land values are a little more favorable to this. But there are some things you may want to incorporate. Certainly, I think it takes probably a more permissive view of the subject than we've heard from this group in the past, and it's fine. There's some language we can prepare a minor amendment to fold in, if you would like, or we can leave it as it is. They're highlighted in the attached section, so no need to discuss now. We can take a look and come back to it. Again, pretty
Yeah, I
minor stuff.
definitely want to come back. I mean, I started to read this yesterday, and it's a big
lot.
issue. There's a lot here. I'm not ready to make any decisions on it tonight.
Certainly. More our purpose was to transmit it to you. There's plenty of time for discussion. I think the county is going to hold their hearing on adopting their version of it a few weeks. So we'll also have their reactions to go off of the next time we talk. The second, an update regarding the Rio ordinance. So we're about to have its first practical application, and interestingly enough, it'll be one that is relatively major but won't come before this group. So Rosenthal Field, the southeasternmost of the three fields in Artesian Park, they're proposing to rotate that so that the diamond is in the northwest corner of the park, and so they're hitting out towards Sheridan Place. And so right now, where all the spectators are right there by those houses at the eastern end of the park. So this falls into the exemption noted there. It'll go to the ABR and then to the village board. But just as this is, a first use of a novel tool, we wanted to make you aware of it.
Did the Park District advise why this is occurring after, I think that ball field was built in 1939 and oriented in that direction? And is it friction from the neighbors?
We didn't get into that level of detail. We just, it was just that I think the Baseball Association has asked for it for some time. I suppose.
Or from operations, just to have the infields back to back?
Back to back and by the field house probably doesn't hurt either. So again, we'll share the results of the ABR's look when we have it. And the last one.
I want to comment. Thank you for sharing, and I think this is fantastic. Not that I care which way the ball field, but I like the fact that we're not seeing this. I think this is a great application of the Rio. We don't need to be involved in this, from my opinion. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. The last one before we go, as you know, Rio required a whole lot of changes to the zoning map. We also went through and cleaned some stuff up, so we have a brand new, very colorful one for you all. Thank you. As members of the PCZBA, you each get your own copy. Limited edition. There's only 18. I am happy to autograph it, so let me get a Sharpie and we'll be off and running.
Well, Glenn, as you collect comments, this is a beautiful map, but the one thing I have to admit that I was very disappointed on is that you didn't plop the zoning designation R4, R1, or whatever into the different zones, because people make Xerox copies of maps, then there's no color. You have to rely on the color. You get 3 shades of blue, and you go, now, is that the R3? You have to look back and forth, and if things get copied to different generations, the blues are gonna merge, and I think you'll find eventually that you're gonna wanna put the CE in the middle of the purple and the R4 in the middle of the east side, just because once you copy it, or once the colors start to fade, people are gonna be struggling with some of these areas where there's like 3 blues. My thought.
I went back and forth on that, and from a design standpoint, it really came down to, we had some variations of it within in there, and it was kind of between the building silhouettes or showing the zone and text really clearly. We picked one. The important part I should mention is, in the usability of this going forward, there'll be a nice PDF on our website, but also we're trying to put out a mapping application too. So all of these property valuation people that call, they can just type in an address and see a definitive answer instead of having to.
But it's really the first professional map we've ever had, I think, in the village.
I
So
wouldn't go that far.
kudos to you. No, it's far above and beyond anything we've had before.
Well,
So,
thank you.
good job on getting it done.
Well done.
Yeah, nicely done. Anything else on the staff report, Glenn?
The usual Hail Mary, full of grace, nothing on Stonebridge, nothing on the PNC Bank.
Anything for next month?
We may have, of course, you'll have some of the things we talked about tonight. And then there may be a special use permit out involving the animal hospital. There's an animal training group that wants to take over part of that space. So very highly similar use, but different ownership, different entry. One of those cases where we think the most appropriate path is that it receive its own special use permit.
Do we know why the vet canceled out?
I think it was, most of it is the unused space they had in their floor plan. They're still gonna be there. I think they're just giving up enough of their space to give them a front entry. I haven't seen floor plans or anything.
So
but
it's still
that's-
interested?
Oh, they're there. Forest Bluff Animal Hospital is there. They're operating. They're running. This is the one by Yuppie Puppy. The one that happened,
Yeah,
the one that was
that's
gonna be talked about tonight,
Yeah.
the lease agreement fell
Didn't
through.
work out. Okay.
All right, agenda item number 9, Commissioners' Report.
Nothing to report here.
Nor here.
A week from Saturday is the annual bike race and block party. Not this Saturday, but coming Saturday. If anybody is of the disposition that would love to stand on a street corner for 2 hours and act as a course marshal, I need to find 45 people in the next 10 days, so give me a call. Or if you know anyone that wouldn't mind doing that, hopefully standing in the sunshine.
What are the times for that?
It's all from 9 o'clock in the morning
2
until
hours.
8:30, but 2-hour shifts. There's 5 different shifts that you can pick from.
Gotcha.
Oh,
Tomorrow, George. We'll talk about tomorrow afternoon, we can talk about the.
Okay.
and I guess just one comment from the discussion this evening. The Target complex and crime, is there any significant incidents?
I respond a few ways. Significant incidents, no, I wouldn't say so. One of my more random duties is I review FOIA requests for police reports when they go out, which Ben's smiling because he also does them with me. And so I see most of the cases that result in arrests. There's probably an average of about 1 a week of shoplifting at Target. Now, there's a few things to consider there. One, my understanding is that a practice of Target is to intentionally wait until people have stolen enough to cross a certain threshold to reach criminal charges, so that may not be everything. That's also not all of our call, we don't get called until that point. I think, I can't speak for what the village did before I got here, but certainly that very idea it's been well known since Walmart started expanding 10, 15 years ago, and I don't know if it was discussed at this group, but it's part of the package, and I think what you're seeing there. Just the idea that all this retail traffic and concentrated retail, there's a noticeable effect on shoplifting.
Of course.
The same as any,
Well,
I would
and-
think the same as any
And in
commercial.
particular, and I can speak from just seeing throughout the various communities we represent, just a number of police reports. Big box stores, the bigger the retailer, it tends to be more shoplifting just because people feel that they're not being monitored the same way than if they're in a small little tiny retail establishment. And because they have a variety of goods that are desirable to people, and so you do get some shoplifting. But it's also more noticeable when it's a store like Target, just because the sheer size, whereas if small retailers are just, per square footage, it's just less likely to have as many incidents with one retailer. But, this is not uncommon in the area amongst big box stores.
I would imagine not. But has it been a burden to our police department?
Not that I've heard. I mean, it's calls to handle certainly, but, you know, they have a professional loss prevention department. They document their cases. I mean, typically our officers appear, they write the citation, they serve the trespass notice, and they leave.
Yeah, I think it was, I won't give my opinion. Okay.
I'm happy to talk with you more afterwards.
Hey,
Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, one other thing. Glenn, I hope you can encourage the dog person to fill in all the blanks, in addition to getting the survey right as to where they really want the fence. But the way I looked at this drawing, and, you know, we all just got it, but it actually looked like she was dividing her yard off into 2 different areas with these blue lines she's drawn. And I'm just struggling, and it looked like from her samples, this was gonna be a solid fence around the entire property and possibly sticking out in the public right-of-way on 2 sides. And there was just no real information on why this was really necessary. And I hope that she just doesn't come in with the same material with 15 days' notice.
Well, certainly, we would push for more professional materials, absolutely.
I want to put a nice wrought iron fence within our property lines with a spike on it, then they can make it only 4 feet. Dog gets caught.
That can never end badly.
All right. Agenda item number 10, adjournment. Is there a motion?
Moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.